Hey everybody, Jim the Historian here. We're going to do our next Ukraine war update. In the coming days, I'll also be doing a video on what a wider confrontation between Russia and NATO, or even just some European countries, would look like. And it is indeed possible that Russia might go to war with part of Europe and not the rest if they attack Finland and Sweden, which we'll go over in the video. Today's video, we're just going to update you on what's been happening the last few days, go over the casualty numbers that have come in, movements of the troops, and then I'm going to spend a good amount of time talking about kind of the tactical shift that I expect to see here. So real fast, situation, as you can see, the map has changed a little bit. Russia has made some gains. Ukraine has actually also made some gains. We'll go over that later. In terms of casualties, right now, the Ukrainian forces have taken around 5,000 casualties in terms of men. That's killed, wounded, or captured. That's fighting men. 800 military vehicles, about 5,000 civilians, 8 ships, and 20 plus aircraft. That civilian number is a little higher than what you might see in the news, but I'm being generous in the sense of I'm attributing all causable deaths or woundings from this conflict to the Russians. So if you're a person, if you're an elderly person, if you're just a person and your house gets bombed and you have to walk on the open steppe for hours and you collapse, and you have to be taken to the hospital, that's a military casualty. On the Russian side, the Russians have taken appreciably higher casualties. They've taken 13,000 casualties in terms of men killed, captured, or wounded, including they lost an entire battalion of artillery with logistical support, about 1,200 men down here in the south, where I'm going to put that X kind of around this town over here. We're not entirely sure where that is. But the videos of that entire battalion being destroyed and the remnants of it are available online. They've lost 120 aircraft, 2,200 military vehicles, and 1 economy. Now, again, I'm being a little more generous on the military vehicles. Some numbers have it lower 17, 1,800. But the reason I'm doing that is that the Russians are pressing into service civilian vehicles and they're getting destroyed. So if you take a civilian bus or a truck and you turn it into a military bus and it gets destroyed, that's a military vehicle that's destroyed. And economy, the ruble is collapsed. The Russian economy is in free fall. Basically, the prediction is that they're going to default on their foreign debt by the end of the month, and potentially be getting into a barter economy within 3 months, which is ridiculously fast economic collapse. In terms of the geopolitics, so far on the good guys side, on the Ukrainian side, we now have 20,000 foreign fighters have signed up and are in the process of coming into Ukraine. Like I said, they need to be equipped, they need to be trained on Eastern Bloc technology, but they're coming. Also, we have about 100 MiG-29 aircraft that NATO is scrounging all across Eastern Europe that are going to be sent into the country. I've talked about this, that this is actually a major escalation. Small arms, sending the Ukrainian small arms is one thing. Sending them actual tanks and aircraft, that's a huge escalation, and it could indeed lead to full-out military conflict with Russia. I will go over that in another video. Also, in an extremely strange twist, we now have 2,000 freedom fighters from Thailand and Japan that have hooked up with a mercenary company in Thailand, and they're going to be inbound into the country. I'm not entirely sure how much that's going to help, but it will help a little bit. On the flip side, we've had about 1.6 million civilians escape over here into Hungary, Poland, and Romania, and then 500,000 civilians have gone into Moldova, Romania, and Bulgaria. Over 2.1 million civilians. Satellites have indicated that Putin has activated his reserves in Siberia. That's about 60,000 men that are en route to the conflict. General assumptions that they're going to come in here and fight in Ukraine. There's also a theory that they're going to go to the Finnish border and potentially attack Finland. So that would, of course, be a major escalation. Russians are also recruiting in Syria. 1,500 troops from Syria are potentially going to come in to teach the Russians how to actually fight a war, which is pretty hilarious if you think about that. There's also rumors that the Taliban from Afghanistan has offered to send troops in against Russia, which is crazy. This conflict is going to become like a big puddle of everybody in the world fighting everybody, which is horrible. In terms of the fronts, we haven't seen too much movement out here in the West. Ukrainian defenses are still holding strong. We keep talking about the importance of this land border for all the supplies and the refugees. No interruption there. That's holding really strong. Further in the south, again, we're waiting this amphibious assault on Odessa. Odessa is now pretty heavily fortified. I'm not entirely sure that the Russians are even going to try it in a meaningful way. Their troops would just get chopped up. This long column up here that I talked about was on this wandering journey into western Ukraine has been stopped. There are some of them that have actually been cut off further north, and they'll probably be captured or destroyed. Ostensibly, we think that they're going for a nuclear reactor that's somewhere in this area, but again, it's very confusing. That's a very deep pincer with no discernible avenue of attack. In the south, again, this key border here, right, has been holding on the Dnieper. The southern Dnieper, Russians have not even tried to cross it, and like I said, they will probably not. They don't have boats. They don't have sufficient air cover. They'll get just slaughtered. In the south, right, Mariupol, okay, has been completely surrounded, and the Russians are actually assaulting it right now. The Russians have made progress here in this this kind of Pontic steppe. This is called the Pontic steppe up here. Again, we talked about this in previous videos, how hard this is going to be to defend. Probably we'll see this here pretty soon, the Russians conquering all this territory. The Ukrainians further north have begun to set up a second line of defense, again on the line that I had recommended for them. So looks like they have been reading some military history manuals or just looking at a map. Again, this is really heavily fortified trench warfare. So again, we said we'll probably just kind of connect it down here. It's very hard for either side to cross this area. Russians have pushed more mobile forces up here and pushed the Ukrainians out. Kharkiv is still holding. The Russians have been unable to flank it. The Ukrainians have set up this flanking position here to protect. Up here, Sumy is again surrounded. They've now stood 9 separate attacks by the Russians, potentially as high as 11, depending how you're counting them. Civilians are being moved out through a humanitarian corridor, which is good for the civilians, but is actually bad for the military defenders, and we'll get to that in a second. Again, up here, we talked about here how this is just a very hard area for Ukraine to defend, and they're not really even trying to defend it up here other than local militias. The Russians are pushing through. You'll probably get here. What you do see, however, is the Ukrainians have launched a successful counterattack east of Kiev to push back these Russians, and they've done a good job of it. They've cleared them out all the way back up here to almost the Russian starting point. The Russian starting point was up here. And that's really good. The Russians have sent their pincers in this wild, like, Mad Hatter pincer movement that I've never seen in military history, where they basically are just driving around on the roads and doing kind of this weak encirclement. I want to say that all these towns are contested along here. The Russians are getting hit in their flanks. There are towns that are under Russian control. There are towns under Ukrainian control. Kiev is heavily fortified, and they're fortifying it even more. Not much change, but I did want to talk about the change that is coming. So the Western arms are coming in. Javelins are in. Stingers are in. They're knocking out tanks. They're knocking out aircraft. Russians have lost 300 tanks. Most of them are modern T-90 tanks or T-72 tanks, even though a T-72 tank is not really modern because the 72 means it was designed in 1972. However, the Russians are looking like they're moving into more of a siege mentality, which we talked about. In actually their agreement to move the civilians out of these cities is so that once the civilians are gone, they can just level them with artillery fire and strategic bombers that the Ukrainians can't shoot down. That is, again, that's one of those things that you're playing the good guys are playing the democracy. You got to move the civilians out. You can't use them as a shield to prevent your enemy from using their artillery. So what we're going to see here is civilians moving out. Eventually, the Russians are going to start shelling the bananas out of these cities, Kiev, Kharkiv. The Ukrainians are going to have to go underground. Once the civilians are out, forget about surface-based defenses like sandbags and stuff like that. Get underground and wait for the Russian attack to come. The converse of that is you knock down all the buildings, you create massive piles of rubble for the attacking tanks that the tanks can't get through. Also, again, I've talked about the casualties. The acceptable casualties on the Russian side for these urban attacks is 90%, which is crazy. But if you see them do an infantry armor attack on Kiev, expect 90% casualties on the Russian side, which is awful. So that's about all we got. Thank you very much for watching the video, and God bless, and let's hope for peace.